Alexa detected an unrecognized voice in your home at 10:37 p.m. The notification glowed on my phone screen as I sipped my morning coffee in a Dallas hotel room, 3 states away from where my husband Ryan was supposedly home alone with our cat. I barely paid attention at first, probably just a TV show triggering the smart device's sensors. We'd gotten the security alerts feature mostly to monitor for break-ins while traveling, not to actually catch anything significant. But something nagged at me. Ryan had texted goodnight at 9:45 saying he was heading to bed early. So why was Alexa detecting voices nearly an hour later? Curious, I tapped the notification. Review recording an app, this data will be deleted in 24 hours. I hesitated only briefly before opening it. The recording began with mundane kitchen sounds, a glass clinking, water running, the refrigerator door opening. Then came a woman's laugh, bright and intimate, followed by Ryan's voice, clearer than I'd ever want to hear in that moment. Shh, not so loud, the neighbors will hear you. The woman's voice again, playful and teasing. Since when do you care about noise? You weren't worried about that 15 minutes ago. That was different, Ryan replied, his voice carrying that low, flirtatious tone I knew so well. Besides, we should save some energy for later. More laughter, then the unmistakable sound of kissing, followed by Ryan saying something about heading back upstairs. The recording cut off after 30 seconds, but it was more than enough. My hands turned ice cold despite the steaming coffee cup between them. The air in the hotel room seemed to vanish as the reality crashed over me. My husband had someone in our home, in our bed. While I was away on the business trip he'd encouraged me to take. It's a great opportunity, babe. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine for 3 days. Just the usual bachelor routine, pizza, beer, and falling asleep to action movies. My vision blurred as I played the recording again, hoping desperately I'd misunderstood. But there was no misinterpreting what I was hearing. The casual intimacy, the reference to 15 minutes ago, the clear implication of more to come upstairs. I set my phone down with unnatural care, as if the slightest sudden movement might cause me to shatter completely. 3 years of marriage, 7 years together total. All of it called into question by 30 seconds of audio that Alexa had dispassionately collected and served directly to my notification panel, as routine as a weather update or calendar reminder. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone again, now navigating to my text messages with Ryan. His last night's message glowed mockingly on the screen. Miss you. House is too quiet without you. Love you. Sleep well. Sent at 9:45 p.m., less than an hour before he was laughing in our kitchen with another woman. I didn't cry, not yet. Instead, I felt a strange, cold clarity descending. I had evidence, undeniable, timestamp verified evidence. No gaslighting, no possible explanation that could undo what I'd heard. But what would I do with this knowledge? Confront him immediately via text? Wait until I returned home tomorrow night and pretend everything was normal until I could see his face? Or was I supposed to call him right now, screaming and demanding answers while sitting in a hotel room 1,000 miles away? I stared at my reflection in the hotel room mirror, watching a woman I barely recognized try to decide how to proceed with the abrupt knowledge that her life had just imploded, packaged neatly in a 30-second audio clip courtesy of the virtual assistant we'd purchased to make our lives more convenient. Ryan and I met during our senior year of college through mutual friends. He was studying computer science. I was finishing my business degree. Our connection wasn't instant fireworks, more like a comfortable recognition, as if we'd known each other for years instead of minutes. He was thoughtful and quick-witted, with an easy confidence that never tipped into arrogance. I was ambitious and organized, with enough spontaneity to balance my practical side. "You're easy to talk to," he told me on our first official date, a simple coffee that stretched into 5 hours of conversation. "Most people just wait for their turn to speak. You actually listen." We graduated and moved to Chicago together, navigating early careers in a studio apartment so small we joked you could cook breakfast while showering. Those lean years cemented our partnership, budgeting for date nights, supporting each other through job stresses, building shared dreams for our future. When he proposed after 4 years together, it felt like the natural progression of a relationship that had grown stronger with each challenge. Our wedding was intimate, 70 guests in a converted industrial space with string lights and food trucks instead of formal catering. We wrote our own vows, mine promising honesty and partnership, his pledging respect and unwavering support. 3 weeks later, we used our modest savings as a down payment on a small house in a developing neighborhood, excited to build our first real home together. The early years of marriage continued the solid foundation we'd established. We had our disagreements, his more relaxed approach to household chores versus my preference for immediate order, my tendency to work late versus his desire for consistent together time. But we addressed conflicts directly and respectfully. We were good at being married, or so I thought. Being dual income with no children afforded us gradual lifestyle improvements. We renovated the kitchen, took a 2-week trip to Portugal, invested in quality furniture rather than the assemble-it-yourself pieces from our apartment days. Ryan changed jobs twice, each move bringing better compensation and opportunities. I built a client base as a marketing consultant, eventually transitioning to a senior role with a national firm that required occasional travel. It was during this career advancement that subtle shifts began in our relationship. Nothing dramatic, but noticeable in retrospect. Ryan became more attached to his routines when I was home, yet surprisingly supportive of my business trips. He developed new hobbies that didn't include me: a weekly pickup basketball game, online gaming sessions with friends I'd never met. Our physical intimacy remained regular but increasingly predictable, lacking the spontaneity and connection of our earlier years. It's natural for the passion to evolve, my married friend Sarah assured me when I cautiously mentioned the changes. The important thing is that you still respect and support each other. That's what lasts. I accepted this conventional wisdom, focusing on our partnership's strengths rather than the vague sense of disconnection I occasionally felt. Ryan was still thoughtful, still made me laugh, still remembered important dates and supported my ambitions. If something felt missing in our connection, I attributed it to normal marital evolution and the demands of building our careers. The smart home devices entered our life gradually, first a video doorbell for security, then programmable thermostats for efficiency, and finally the virtual assistant speakers in several rooms. Ryan, with his tech background, handled the setup and management. I appreciated the convenience without paying much attention to the specifics. "Did you know these can send security alerts?" he mentioned casually 6 months ago, showing me the settings on his phone. "If there's unexpected activity while we're gone, we'll get notifications." I nodded absently, thinking it a sensible precaution given our occasionally overlapping travel schedules, never imagining the unexpected activity would involve my husband and another woman in our kitchen. 3 months ago, Ryan began commenting more frequently about my work travel, but not to discourage it. "You should definitely take that Dallas opportunity," he said when the potential trip first arose. 3 days is nothing, and it could lead to bigger projects. His enthusiasm struck me as slightly odd. Earlier in our marriage, he'd been more likely to playfully complain about my absences, but I appreciated the support and didn't question it deeply. I'd been working toward this account for months, and his encouragement aligned with our long-standing pattern of backing each other's professional goals. The night before my departure, we had a quiet dinner at home. Ryan seemed distracted, checking his phone more often than usual, but I attributed it to work stress. We made love that night, a rare midweek occurrence that I interpreted as a sweet goodbye before my trip. Now I wondered if it had been motivated by guilt, a preemptive compensation for what he'd already planned to do in my absence. As I sat in that Dallas hotel room, the recording playing for a third time on my phone, I tried to identify when exactly things had changed. When had we shifted from being partners who shared everything to people with separate lives and secrets? When had Ryan, my thoughtful, straightforward Ryan, become capable of such calculated deception? More disturbingly, I wondered if this betrayal was an isolated incident spurred by opportunity or evidence of a longer-term pattern I'd been too trusting to recognize. Was this woman a random encounter, a recent development, or had there been others before our virtual assistant became an unwitting witness? The questions multiplied while answers remained elusive, locked in the mind of a man who had spent the previous night with another woman in our home while I worked 3 states away, believing in a marriage that suddenly seemed constructed on shifting sand. After the initial shock subsided, the systematic part of my brain took over. If I was going to confront Ryan, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. Was this a one-time indiscretion or part of a pattern? A recent development or a long-term deception? I needed more information before deciding how to proceed. I began with the evidence at hand. Our virtual assistant stored recordings in a history log, accessible through the app settings. Most were mundane, requests for weather forecasts, timer settings, music selections. But filtering by date revealed several late-night activations during my previous business trips over the past 4 months. Most contained only background noise or brief, unidentifiable sounds. But 2 more recordings caught fragments of conversation, both featuring the same female voice I'd heard that morning. "Won't be back until Thursday, right?" she asked in one clip from 6 weeks earlier. "Yeah, we have until then," Ryan had responded before apparently noticing the device's indicator light and saying, "Alexa, stop listening." The evidence suggested this wasn't an impulsive mistake, but an ongoing arrangement, carefully timed around my travel schedule. The premeditation made it somehow worse, not a momentary lapse of judgment, but a sustained, deliberate deception. I moved to our shared cloud storage next, searching for any photos Ryan might have inadvertently backed up from his phone. Most recent images were innocuous, screenshots of articles, pictures of a colleague's new puppy, a sunset from our backyard. Nothing incriminating, but I noticed gaps in the date sequence that suggested possible deletions. Our shared calendar revealed nothing suspicious at first glance. Ryan's regular work schedule, basketball on Thursdays, occasional dinners with his college friends. But cross-referencing with my past trips showed a pattern. His basketball games were always canceled when I traveled, replaced with blank evenings that now took on sinister significance. Checking our credit card statements yielded subtle but telling evidence. Ryan usually ordered delivery when alone, a habit from his bachelor days that never fully disappeared. But during my last 3 trips, there were no food delivery charges. Instead, I found grocery store purchases, typically including wine, and a recurring charge from a local bakery near our house. Receipts he hadn't bothered to hide, perhaps assuming I'd never scrutinized routine expenses this closely. By mid-afternoon, I'd assembled enough evidence to confirm my worst fears, but the woman's identity remained a mystery. The voice was vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it definitively. I reluctantly turned to social media, examining Ryan's interactions for any unusual patterns. His activity was modest and seemingly innocent. Occasional likes on friends' photos, comments on sports discussions, nothing that screamed infidelity. But in his tagged photos, one name appeared with increasing frequency over the past year: Megan Henderson, a woman who had joined his company's marketing department approximately 10 months ago. I'd met her briefly at Ryan's holiday party last December, tall, confident, with an easy laugh. I remembered feeling a flicker of something, not quite jealousy, but awareness, when I noticed how animated Ryan became discussing projects they shared. I dismissed the feeling as petty at the time, trusting in our 7-year relationship. Now that trust seemed painfully naive. A deeper search revealed more connections. They'd been tagged at the same industry happy hours several times. They'd both checked in at a technology conference 3 months ago, a weekend Ryan had described as mostly boring sessions and networking. Megan's Instagram showed several photos from that conference weekend, including cityscape shots taken from what appeared to be a high hotel room with distinctive curtains I recognized from the chain Ryan typically used for business travel. The conference they'd both legitimately attended appeared to have been the cover for something more personal. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. I hesitated before my next step, aware I was crossing a line but past caring about normal boundaries. Ryan and I had shared our phone locations throughout our relationship, initially for practical coordination, later out of habit. I hadn't checked his location in months, having no reason to monitor his movements. I opened the tracking app now, watching as it showed his phone at his office downtown. But people don't always keep their phones with them. On impulse, I accessed our home security system, another smart feature Ryan had enthusiastically installed, and checked the front door camera footage from that morning. There it was. At 7:43 a.m., Ryan left for work alone. But at 7:52 a.m., a woman exited our house, Megan, unmistakable even from the slightly distorted angle. She glanced around quickly before walking to a car parked down the street, carrying what appeared to be an overnight bag. She had stayed after I'd received the notification, after they'd gone upstairs together. She had slept in our home, likely in our bed, and left for work from our door as if she belonged there. The accumulated evidence crushed any lingering hope that I'd misunderstood or overreacted. This wasn't just physical infidelity, but something deeper, a comfortable routine suggesting emotional involvement beyond casual betrayal. They weren't hiding from each other, they were hiding from me. As evening approached in Dallas, I faced a decision: continue my planned business dinner with clients, maintaining a professional facade while my personal life imploded, or cancel and risk damaging the account I'd worked so hard to secure. With mechanical precision, I prepared for the dinner, applied makeup over eyes that wanted to overflow with tears, chose earrings from the set Ryan had given me for our last anniversary, rehearsed talking points about marketing strategies while mentally cataloging evidence of my husband's betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from Ryan. "How's Dallas? Kill it at your dinner tonight. Love you." The casual affection, the manufactured normalcy, the love you from a man who had spent the previous night with another woman in our bed, it crystallized my resolve. I would complete this business trip successfully. I would secure this account. And when I returned home tomorrow night, I would confront my husband with the full weight of evidence I'd accumulated. I texted back with hollow cheerfulness. "Dallas is great. About to head to dinner. Talk tomorrow." No love you in return. A small petty omission that he likely wouldn't even notice, but it felt like the first honest communication between us in what I now realized had been months of carefully constructed fiction. My flight landed at 4:17 p.m. the following day. Every moment of the journey home felt surreal, making small talk with a seatmate, politely thanking the flight attendant, collecting my luggage from the carousel, all while carrying the knowledge that I was returning to a marriage that existed only in appearance. I had considered multiple approaches during the sleepless night before. I could confront Ryan immediately with the recordings and evidence. I could pretend ignorance to see if he would confess. I could even set a trap, mentioning that our virtual assistant had sent an alert and watching his reaction. In the end, I chose directness. 7 years together deserved at least that much, even if he hadn't extended the same courtesy to me. When I arrived home, the house looked exactly as it always did. My favorite flowers, purple irises, sat in a vase on the entry table. A welcome home note propped beside them in Ryan's handwriting. The performative thoughtfulness made my stomach turn. How many hours had passed between Megan leaving our bed and Ryan purchasing these flowers? Had he changed our sheets? Aired out the space that should have been sacred to our marriage? I heard Ryan in the kitchen, likely preparing the welcome home dinner he had promised via text that morning. I left my suitcase by the door and walked toward the sound of chopping and soft music playing from the speaker. Our virtual assistant now delivering a dinner playlist as if it hadn't delivered relationship-ending evidence just 36 hours earlier. "Hey, you're earlier than I expected." Ryan looked up with a genuine-seeming smile, setting down his knife to greet me with a kiss I forced myself to accept. "How was the flight?" "Fine." I kept my voice neutral, studying his face for signs of guilt or discomfort. There were none. He was either completely at ease with his deception or exceptionally skilled at compartmentalizing. Neither possibility offered comfort. "Dinner's almost ready. I'm making that pesto pasta you love." He turned back to the cutting board, continuing to chop basil as if this were any normal homecoming. "How did the final meeting go? Did you close the deal?" "I did." I placed my phone on the counter, screen up. "The client signed this morning." "That's fantastic. We should celebrate. There's champagne in the fridge." "Before we celebrate," I said carefully, "there's something we need to discuss." His hands paused momentarily before resuming their rhythm. "Sounds serious. Everything okay?" No, Ryan, everything is not okay. I tapped my phone screen, opening the virtual assistant app. Our Alexa sent me an interesting notification while I was gone. His chopping stopped entirely. A microscopic tightening around his eyes was the only visible reaction, but it confirmed what I already knew. He immediately understood what I might have received. Yesterday morning, I got an alert about unrecognized voices in our home the night before. I maintained steady eye contact, along with a recording. Would you like to hear it, or would you prefer to explain yourself first? The color drained from his face as he set the knife down with deliberate care. Ellie, I can explain. Explain what exactly? That while I was working in Dallas, you had another woman in our home, in our kitchen, in our bed? It's not what you think. Don't. I cut him off with a sharp gesture. I heard the recording, Ryan. I heard her laugh. I heard you telling her to be quiet. I heard what you said about 15 minutes ago and going back upstairs. I checked the security footage and saw her leaving our house yesterday morning with an overnight bag. His posture collapsed slightly. You've been investigating me? Did you really expect me to ignore what I heard? To pretend I didn't know what was happening in my own home? I never meant for this to happen, he said, the default response of every caught cheater in history. Which part? Having an affair with Megan Henderson, or getting caught because you forgot about our smart home devices? His eyes widened at my mention of her name. How did you... Does it matter? I know who she is. I know you've been bringing her here during my business trips. I know this has been going on for months. My voice remained steady despite the storm inside me. What I don't know is why. Why her? Why in our home? Why risk everything we've built together? Ryan sank onto a kitchen stool, running his hands through his hair. It started at that tech conference in February. We were working on the same project, staying at the same hotel. One night we had drinks with the team, everyone else left, and we just connected. Connected, I repeated, the euphemism hanging bitterly between us, and then decided to bring that connection into our marital bed whenever I was conveniently out of town. It wasn't planned like that initially. It was supposed to be a one-time mistake, but then things got more complicated and... Complicated? I interrupted. Was it complicated to check my travel schedule before making your plans with her? Was it complicated to create a system where she'd leave in the morning after I'd already received your miss you texts? Because from where I'm standing, it looks meticulously organized. His silence was confirmation enough. Did you ever feel guilty? I asked, needing to understand the man I thought I knew. When you were changing our sheets after she left? When you were buying welcome home flowers? When you were texting that you loved me from a bed you'd shared with her the night before? Of course I felt guilty, he said, a flash of defensiveness breaking through his shame. I've been torn apart by this. I never wanted to hurt you. Yet you made the same choice repeatedly, for months. I pulled up the calendar on my phone. 4 business trips, Ryan. 4 opportunities to end it before I discovered it. 4 chances to be honest about whatever's missing in our marriage instead of seeking it elsewhere. He looked up, eyes pleading. I do love you, Ellie. That hasn't changed. This thing with Megan, it's different. It doesn't take away from what we have. The audacity of this statement momentarily stole my breath. What we have? What exactly do we have, Ryan? Because I thought we had honesty. I thought we had respect. I thought we had fidelity. It seems I was wrong about all of that. We can work through this, he insisted. People make mistakes. Marriages survive affairs all the time. This wasn't a mistake. A mistake is accidental. You made deliberate choices repeatedly to violate our marriage. You brought another woman into our home, the one space that should have remained ours alone. The full weight of his betrayal finally cracked my composure. Tears spilled over as I continued. Do you know what it feels like to realize your husband installed security features that ended up documenting his own betrayal? That the technology meant to make us feel safe instead revealed how unsafe our marriage actually was? Ryan moved toward me, reaching out. Ellie, please. I stepped back. Don't touch me. I can barely look at you right now, much less accept your comfort. His hand dropped. What happens now? It was the question I had been asking myself since the moment I heard that recording. What happens when trust is shattered so completely? when the foundation of 7 years together is revealed to be structurally unsound? I don't know, I answered honestly. I need space to think. I've booked a hotel room for tonight. I'll decide what comes next when I'm not standing in the same kitchen where you entertained your girlfriend 2 nights ago. Please don't leave, he said, panic edging into his voice. We should talk this through. I'll answer any questions you have. Complete transparency from now on. Transparency wasn't optional when we got married, Ryan. It was fundamental to our vows. I picked up my phone, unable to bear another minute in the space that no longer felt like home. You don't get credit for offering honesty after being caught in a web of lies. As I turned to leave, a final practical thought occurred to me. You should know that I've backed up the recordings and evidence to my personal cloud storage, in case you consider trying to gaslight me later or rewrite what actually happened. The look that crossed his face, a mixture of shame and thwarted calculation, told me this precaution wasn't entirely unwarranted. At the doorway, I paused without turning back. You know what the ironic part is? I've spent the past day trying to understand why our virtual assistant activated that night. It must have heard its wake word in your conversation, which means one of you said Alexa while flirting in our kitchen. I allowed myself a hollow laugh. Technology has certainly changed how affairs work. In our parents' day, it was lipstick on collars or unexplained credit card charges. For us, it's smart devices accidentally recording infidelity and sending helpful notifications to the oblivious spouse. I walked out then, leaving behind the welcome home flowers, the half-prepared dinner, and the man who had just confirmed that the life we'd built together had been compromised by his systematic deception. The suburban street looked surreally normal as I placed my overnight bag in the car I'd only just unloaded from the airport. As I drove away, rain began to fall, a cinematically appropriate backdrop to the end of what I had believed was a solid marriage, undone by 30 seconds of audio captured by an unfeeling device designed to make our lives more convenient. The first 72 hours after discovery passed in a fog of practical logistics and emotional upheaval. I extended my hotel stay twice, unable to face returning to our home with its fresh memories of betrayal. Ryan's calls and texts arrived with predictable frequency, initial pleas to come home and talk, followed by increasingly detailed explanations and apologies, culminating in promises of therapy and rebuilding. I responded only to practical matters, maintaining emotional distance while I processed the seismic shift in my reality. The marriage I thought was stable, if occasionally routine, had been undermined by months of calculated deception. The partner I'd trusted implicitly had compartmentalized our life together to accommodate a parallel relationship. The home that had been our sanctuary was now tainted by intimate betrayal. On the 4th day, I met with a lawyer, not necessarily to begin divorce proceedings, but to understand my options. The consultation was surreal, discussing the potential dissolution of my marriage in the same tone I might use to review a business contract. Connecticut is a no-fault divorce state, the attorney explained, but documented infidelity can sometimes impact property division if it can be shown to have involved marital assets. Like using our home for the affair? I asked, thinking of the utility bills, the groceries, the spaces Ryan had shared with Megan. Potentially, though it's not straightforward. Courts generally focus on financial rather than emotional misuse of assets. She made a note on her legal pad. The recordings and surveillance footage might be useful leverage in negotiations, but there are privacy considerations about their admissibility. I left with a folder of information and the unsettling awareness that legal proceedings could reduce 7 years of marriage to asset spreadsheets and negotiation tactics. The thought brought no comfort, regardless of how justified such measures might be. My parents called daily from Arizona, their concern evident despite my carefully edited explanations. I told them we were going through a difficult time and taking some space, unwilling to share the humiliating details of how I'd discovered Ryan's betrayal. You know you can come stay with us, my mother offered repeatedly. The guest room is always ready. The thought of retreating to my childhood home at 29, marriage imploding after just 3 years, felt like a regression I couldn't bear. I deflected gently, assuring them I had support while avoiding specifics. That support primarily came from my closest friend Diane, who had immediately offered her spare room when I finally shared what had happened. After a week at the hotel, I accepted, needing a friendly space untouched by betrayal associations. "Stay as long as you need," she insisted, helping me unload the 2 suitcases of belongings I'd retrieved from my house during an hour when Ryan was at work. No pressure to talk unless you want to. Her guest room became my refuge, a neutral space where I could begin processing the practical and emotional aftermath of discovery. I took a week of emergency leave from work, unable to focus on client strategies while my personal life lay in ruins. The understanding shown by my supervisor was simultaneously comforting and mortifying. "Take the time you need," she said. "The team will cover your projects. Family comes first." The irony wasn't lost on me. My once solid family unit had been revealed as fundamentally compromised, yet it still qualified as a legitimate crisis deserving professional accommodation. Throughout these initial weeks, Ryan continued his campaign of reconciliation. Flowers delivered to Diane's address. How had he found it? Links to marriage counselors specialized in infidelity recovery. A letter detailing his remorse and commitment to rebuilding trust. "I've ended things completely with Megan," he wrote. "I've requested a department transfer at work to eliminate any contact. I'm seeing a therapist to understand why I made these destructive choices. I know words mean nothing right now, but I'm committed to showing you through actions that this marriage is worth saving." His efforts reflected a genuine desire to repair what he'd broken, but they couldn't address the fundamental question that kept me awake at night. How could I ever trust him again? Not just to remain faithful, but to be truthful about anything. The scope of his deception had been so comprehensive, so carefully maintained, that it called into question every aspect of his character. 3 weeks after discovery, I agreed to meet him at a neutral location, a coffee shop equidistant from our house and Diane's apartment. The setting offered both privacy and the safety of public accountability, preventing either emotional extremes or false intimacy. Ryan arrived early, visibly nervous, hair slightly disheveled in a way that suggested stress rather than carelessness. He'd lost weight, his wedding ring now slightly loose on his finger, a detail I noticed immediately and then hated myself for registering with concern rather than indifference. "Thank you for meeting me," he began once our coffees arrived. "I know you have every reason never to speak to me again." "I'm here because 7 years together deserves at least a conversation," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "It doesn't guarantee any particular outcome." He nodded. "That's fair, more than fair considering what I've done." The conversation that followed covered expected territory. His explanation of how the affair had progressed from workplace flirtation to full betrayal. His acknowledgement of the calculated nature of using my business trips as opportunities. His inability to justify actions he himself recognized as indefensible. "The cliché would be to say I wasn't thinking clearly," he said. "But that's not true. I was thinking very clearly about how to maintain both relationships without disrupting either." The compartmentalization became almost a skill I was perversely proud of, managing 2 separate lives without visible consequences. His honesty about the deliberate nature of his deception was simultaneously refreshing and devastating. This hadn't been a momentary weakness or impulsive mistake, but a sustained campaign of duplicity from someone who had promised partnership and transparency. "Why our home?" I asked, returning to the question that continued to disturb me most deeply. "Of all the boundaries you could have respected while betraying our marriage, why violate the one space that should have remained ours alone?" Ryan's expression reflected genuine remorse. "I've asked myself that same question in therapy. The truth is both simple and terrible. Convenience outweighed respect. Having her over when you were away was logistically easier than hotel rooms or her apartment with roommates. I told myself it was just a physical space, separate from what made our home meaningful." "But it wasn't just physical space," I countered, pain breaking through my carefully maintained composure. "It was our sanctuary, the place we built together to be safe from the outside world. You turned it into a stage set for deception." "I know." He looked down at his coffee. "I could say I didn't fully understand what I was destroying in the moment, but that wouldn't be entirely true. I knew it was wrong. I chose to ignore that knowledge for my own gratification. I have no defense that wouldn't insult your intelligence. The absence of excuses was notable. No claims of marriage dissatisfaction, no attempts to distribute blame, just a straightforward acknowledgement of his unilateral betrayal. In another context, such accountability might have been the foundation for rebuilding. In this reality, it remained insufficient against the magnitude of the breach. "What do you want now?" I asked after a long silence. "I want another chance," he said simply. "Not because I deserve one, I don't, but because I believe what we built over 7 years is worth fighting for. I want the opportunity to demonstrate that the man you married still exists beneath the terrible choices I've made." "That's the problem," I replied softly. "I'm not sure that man does exist. The Ryan I thought I married wouldn't have been capable of systematically deceiving me for months. So either my understanding of who you are was completely wrong from the beginning, or you've become someone unrecognizable to me." He had no answer for this, the fundamental paradox of betrayal by someone previously trusted completely. "I need more time," I concluded, not to punish you or to create artificial suspense about my decision, but because I genuinely don't know if rebuilding is possible after this kind of breach. I need to determine whether forgiveness would represent strength or merely self-destructive denial. As we prepared to leave, Ryan tentatively mentioned practical matters: bills needing attention, mail accumulating, household maintenance issues. The mundane responsibilities of shared life continuing despite the emotional earthquake that had rendered that sharing untenable. "I can handle all of it," he offered. "Or we can establish a system for managing these things separately while you decide what comes next." We settled on the latter, creating practical boundaries that acknowledge the liminal space our marriage now occupied, neither fully intact nor officially terminated, but suspended in the aftermath of betrayal while assessment of damage continued. In the parking lot, Ryan paused before returning to his car. "For what it's worth, I've disconnected all the smart devices in the house, not to hide anything, but because I realized how much they must now represent violation to you. The technology that was supposed to make our home more comfortable instead revealed its fundamental compromise." The gesture, while meaningless in practical terms, demonstrated an understanding of the particular trauma I'd experienced, not just discovering infidelity, but having that discovery mediated through our home's supposed security features. It suggested a capacity for empathy that seemed incongruent with his months of calculated deception. As I drove away, I realized this inconsistency represented the central challenge of my decision. Reconciliation would require believing in the authenticity of the remorseful, insightful man I'd just spoken with, while accepting that this same person had sustained elaborate deception without apparent difficulty for months. The cognitive dissonance was nearly unbearable. The weeks that followed brought gradual adaptation to my new reality, establishing separate financial arrangements, creating a schedule for accessing our home when necessary, navigating concerned inquiries from friends and family who sensed something significant had happened but remained unaware of specifics. Through it all, the recording that had revealed everything remained in my phone, a 30-second audio file that had fundamentally altered the course of my life. I couldn't bring myself to delete it, yet listening brought fresh pain each time. It existed as both evidence and wound, validation and trauma, the undeniable truth that had freed me from ignorance while destroying the foundations of my marriage. The virtual assistant that had captured and delivered this truth remained unused in our now empty home, disconnected as promised, its innocent functionality forever associated with the moment it had transformed from convenient technology to unwitting whistleblower. Healing after betrayal, I learned, isn't linear. It's a series of overlapping processes: grief for what was lost, anger at the deception, fear about the future, and gradual reconstruction of identity independent from the relationship that had partially defined me for 7 years. 6 weeks after discovery, I began therapy with Dr. Levine, a specialist in relationship trauma. Her office, warm lighting, comfortable seating, conspicuous absence of smart devices, became a sanctuary for processing what had happened and determining my path forward. Betrayal trauma affects not just how you view your relationship, but how you understand reality itself, she explained during our second session. When someone you trusted implicitly proves capable of sustained deception, it challenges your basic assumptions about what's real and reliable in your life. This framework helped explain the hypervigilance I'd developed, fact-checking casual statements from colleagues, questioning my memories of conversations with friends, scanning ordinary interactions for signs of hidden agendas. The betrayal had contaminated not just my marriage, but my fundamental approach to trusting others. "This response is normal," Dr. Levine assured me. "Your brain is trying to protect you from future harm by becoming more alert to potential deception. The challenge is developing discernment that allows reasonable trust without naive vulnerability." Alongside individual therapy, I attended a support group for those experiencing relationship betrayal. The shared experiences, from one-night indiscretions to elaborate double lives, provided both perspective and validation. My situation wasn't unique, but neither was it trivial. The pain I felt wasn't disproportionate or self-indulgent, but an appropriate response to profound violation. "The worst part wasn't the physical infidelity," shared Maria, 3 years past her own discovery day. "It was realizing that someone I thought I knew completely had this capacity for deception. That's what takes longest to reconcile, not what they did, but what it reveals about who they actually are." This distinction resonated deeply. The acts themselves, Ryan bringing another woman into our home, sharing intimacy meant for our marriage, were painful. But more destabilizing was the recognition that he had maintained this deception effortlessly, coming home from weekends with Megan to greet me with seemingly genuine affection, discussing future plans while secretly undermining our present. 2 months after discovery, I finally returned to our house, not to reconcile, but to properly assess what I wanted from the home we'd shared. Ryan had relocated to a month-to-month apartment, giving me space to determine next steps without his presence complicating the process. Standing in our living room felt surreal. The furniture we'd chosen together, the photographs from happier times, the small imperfections we'd planned to address someday. The space held both precious memories and the shadow of betrayal, making it simultaneously familiar and foreign. I walked through each room, confronting the emotional associations that lingered. In the kitchen, where our virtual assistant had captured that fateful recording. The living room where we'd planned our future. The bedroom that had been violated by the presence of another woman. The disconnected smart devices remained where they'd been, silent witnesses no longer serving their intended functions. I found myself standing before the kitchen unit that had sent the notification, examining the innocuous cylinder that had inadvertently delivered truth while shattering illusion. "Thank you," I whispered, feeling slightly ridiculous addressing an inanimate object, yet needing to acknowledge the strange role it had played in revealing what might otherwise have remained hidden much longer. That night, I slept in our guest room, unable to reclaim the primary bedroom despite fresh linens and rearranged furniture. Some spaces remained too contaminated by betrayal to be comfortably re-inhabited. 3 months after discovery, Ryan and I met with a mediator to discuss longer-term arrangements while I continued evaluating whether reconciliation was possible. The conversation focused on practical matters, financial separations, property considerations, timeline for more permanent decisions, but underlying these logistics was the fundamental question neither of us could definitively answer: could trust ever be sufficiently restored? "I've been doing intensive therapy," Ryan shared during this meeting, "both to understand why I made these choices and to develop healthier patterns for the future. I'm not asking you to return based on promises alone, but I want you to know I'm committed to becoming someone worthy of trust again, whether or not our marriage survives." His efforts seemed genuine, his insights increasingly substantial rather than performative. The initial desperate promises had given way to more measured, consistent actions, demonstrating commitment to personal change. He'd maintained professional separation from Megan, continued regular therapy, respected my boundaries while remaining available for whatever form of communication I could manage. "I appreciate the work you're doing," I acknowledged. It matters for your future, regardless of what happens between us. But I need to be honest. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you completely again. Not because you haven't shown remorse or commitment to change, but because once the capacity for this level of deception has been revealed, it's nearly impossible to unrealize. He nodded, accepting this assessment without defensiveness. I understand. All I'm asking is that you remain open to the possibility that trust might be rebuilt differently, not as blind faith, but as something more conscious and deliberately maintained. 4 months after discovery, I reached a decision point regarding our home. Continuing to maintain it while living separately created practical complications and emotional strain. Either we needed to recommit to shared occupancy or acknowledge the necessity of selling the property that now contained too many complicated associations. I can't live there again, I realized during a therapy session. Not because of the practical reminders, but because the fundamental feeling of safety I associate with home has been compromised. Every strange sound would make me wonder. Every business trip would trigger anxiety. The smart home features we installed for convenience would forever represent vulnerability and exposure. This recognition that the space itself had been irreparably altered by what had occurred there provided clarity about at least one aspect of my path forward. We listed the house the following week, a concrete step toward dissolving at least the physical manifestation of our shared life. 5 months after discovery, standing in our emptied home as the new owners completed their final walkthrough, I experienced an unexpected sense of release. The furniture had been divided or sold, the photographs carefully sorted, the smart devices removed entirely. Nothing remained of the life we had built except the memories each of us carried forward. "Are you okay?" Ryan asked quietly as we prepared to hand over the keys, his concern seemingly genuine despite the circumstances that had led to this moment. "I will be," I replied with surprising certainty. "Not today, maybe not for a while yet, but eventually." His nod acknowledged both the pain he had caused and the resilience he had always recognized in me, one of the few perceptions from our marriage that remained untainted by later revelations. 6 months after discovery, I made the decision that had been gradually crystallizing through therapy, reflection, and cautious steps toward an independent future. Ryan and I met at the coffee shop that had become our neutral territory, the familiarity of the setting contrasting with the weight of what needed to be said. "I've decided to file for divorce," I told him directly, respecting our history enough to deliver this news without cushioning, not out of anger or punishment, but because I've realized I can't rebuild the trust necessary for the kind of marriage I want and deserve. Pain flickered across his expression, but not surprise. He had recognized the trajectory of our separation even while hoping for a different outcome. "I understand," he said quietly. "I won't make this more difficult by fighting what you've concluded is necessary. I still believe we could have rebuilt something meaningful, but I respect that the work required feels impossible from your perspective." His acceptance without manipulation or guilt tactics affirmed that my decision was appropriate, not because reconciliation was theoretically impossible after infidelity, but because the specific nature of his betrayal had undermined foundations too fundamental to reconstruct. "For what it's worth," he added, "I'll always consider those 7 years with you the most significant of my life. What I destroyed through my choices was genuinely precious, not something I dismissed or undervalued. That makes it worse in many ways, but I want you to know that what we had was real, even if my actions suggested otherwise." This acknowledgement that our relationship had held genuine value despite its ultimate destruction offered an unexpected form of closure. The betrayal hadn't invalidated everything that came before, merely rendered its continuation untenable. 7 months after discovery, with divorce proceedings underway but not yet finalized, I moved into a new apartment in a different neighborhood. The space was entirely my own, furniture chosen solely for my preferences, technology limited to the essentials with privacy considerations paramount, no smart devices or virtual assistants monitoring my activities. "It's a fresh start," Diane observed, helping me arrange the living room. "Not just a new address, but a new approach to creating home." She was right. This space represented not just physical relocation, but psychological reconstruction, building a life based on hard-won wisdom rather than naive assumptions about trust and security. The pain of betrayal had transformed into something more complex, a heightened awareness of relationship dynamics, a more nuanced understanding of trust, a deeper appreciation for authentic connection. 8 months after discovery, I encountered Megan unexpectedly at a professional networking event. The moment stretched with awkward recognition, her flush of embarrassment, my instinctive tension, the shared awareness of our unusual connection. "I'm sorry," she said simply when circumstances forced brief interaction. "For whatever it's worth, which isn't much." "It isn't," I confirmed, maintaining dignified distance. "But the responsibility was primarily his, not yours. You made poor choices involving someone else's marriage, but he's the one who betrayed actual vows." The exchange was brief but significant, acknowledging reality without creating unnecessary drama, maintaining appropriate boundaries without performative hostility. Another small indicator that healing was progressing, that the discovery that had once seemed world-ending had been integrated into my understanding without defining my entire identity. 9 months after discovery, I found myself genuinely laughing at a dinner with friends. Not the performative social participation I'd managed in earlier months, but authentic enjoyment unencumbered by constant awareness of loss. The moment caught me by surprise, a clear marker of healing that had occurred so gradually I hadn't fully recognized its progression. "It's nice to see you really smile again," commented my friend Michael afterwards. "For a while there, it seemed like the light had gone out." His observation captured something essential about the recovery process. Not returning to who I'd been before, that person no longer existed, but finding my way to a new iteration capable of joy despite carrying knowledge of betrayal. 10 months after discovery, with divorce proceedings nearing completion, I purchased a simple security system for my apartment, basic monitoring without elaborate smart features or audio recording capabilities. The decision represented an important reclamation, using technology for actual security rather than avoiding it entirely due to negative associations. "It's about finding the right balance," I explained to Dr. Levine. "Not rejecting helpful tools because of past trauma, but being conscious about how I implement them based on what I've learned." This approach, informed caution rather than either naive trust or paranoid rejection, increasingly characterized my rebuilding process. Not just regarding technology, but in relationships, professional interactions, and personal boundaries. 12 months after discovery, a full year since that morning notification in a Dallas hotel room, I met with Ryan one final time before our divorce was officially processed. The conversation was neither bitter nor nostalgic, but reflective of the complex journey we had traveled separately and together. "I want you to know I'm continuing the work we discussed," he shared. "Not to win you back, I've accepted that's not possible, but because I never want to be capable of causing that kind of harm again, to anyone." "I believe you," I replied, surprised to recognize the statement as genuine rather than perfunctory. Not complete trust, certainly, but acknowledgement of the effort he had demonstrated consistently throughout our separation. "And you?" he asked. "Are you finding your way forward?" I considered the question carefully. "I am. Not back to who I was. That person doesn't exist anymore. But forward to someone with clearer boundaries, more conscious trust, and deeper understanding of both human fallibility and resilience." As we parted for what might be the last time, I realized the virtual assistant that had captured his betrayal had inadvertently delivered something beyond devastating truth. It had initiated a profound reset, painful beyond measure, but ultimately necessary for building a life based on authentic understanding rather than comfortable illusion. The technology designed to make our home more convenient had instead forced confrontation with inconvenient reality. In doing so, it had set in motion a transformation neither of us would have chosen, but that had ultimately revealed essential truths about ourselves, our relationship, and the complex interplay of trust, betrayal, and resilience that defines human connection. 2 years have passed since that morning notification changed everything. In that time, I've built a life I couldn't have imagined during those first raw days of discovery, not because it's objectively better than what existed before, but because it's authentically mine, constructed with conscious intention, rather than inherited assumptions about trust and partnership. The question people ask most frequently when they learn about my divorce is whether technology was to blame for the dissolution of my marriage. If you hadn't gotten that alert, you might still be happily together, they suggest, as if ignorance would have been preferable to painful truth. My response has evolved over time, from defensive justification to simple clarity. The virtual assistant didn't create the betrayal, it merely revealed what was already happening. Without that notification, I might have remained unaware longer, but the marriage I believed in had already been compromised by choices made long before that recording. This perspective, distinguishing between the messenger and the message, represents one of many insights that emerged from the wreckage of betrayal. Not an understanding I would have chosen to gain through such painful means, but valuable nonetheless in navigating a world where technology increasingly mediates our most intimate relationships. The divorce was finalized 14 months after discovery, the legal process remarkably straightforward compared to the emotional untangling it represented. Ryan and I maintained the respectful distance established during our separation, interacting only when necessary for practical matters, and gradually establishing independent lives without performative hostility or pretended friendship. I occasionally hear updates about him through mutual connections, a promotion at work, a move to a different neighborhood, eventually a new relationship. These reports no longer trigger acute pain, merely a complex mix of emotions that includes both sadness for what was lost and acceptance that its loss was necessary. My own journey forward hasn't followed the neat trajectory suggested by self-help books or well-meaning friends. There was no magical moment when the betrayal ceased mattering, no clear milestone marking complete healing. Instead, transformation occurred incrementally through daily choices to integrate what had happened without allowing it to define my entire identity. The wisdom gained through this process has been hard-won but profound, reshaping not just my approach to romantic relationships, but my fundamental understanding of trust, resilience, and authentic connection. Trust is neither a permanent state nor a binary condition. Before the betrayal, I trusted unconsciously and completely, an automatic orientation toward someone who had given me no reason for suspicion. The devastation that followed when that trust was violated initially pushed me toward the opposite extreme, hypervigilance and deep skepticism about everyone's motives and statements. Through therapy and reflection, I've developed a more nuanced understanding of trust as dynamic rather than static, requiring ongoing evidence rather than permanent certification. Not cynicism that assumes the worst, but informed discernment that recognizes human complexity and the reality that people can be simultaneously genuine in some contexts and deceptive in others. Healthy trust includes appropriate verification, my therapist explained during a pivotal session, not constant surveillance from insecurity, but reasonable awareness that protects your well-being. This balanced perspective has allowed me to form new relationships, romantic and platonic, without either naive vulnerability or paranoid withdrawal. I trust consciously now, with eyes open to both potential betrayal and authentic connection. Technology amplifies existing human tendencies rather than creating new ones. The smart devices in our home didn't cause Ryan's infidelity, but they created both opportunities for detection and new requirements for deception. The virtual assistant that ultimately revealed his betrayal had been installed with his enthusiastic support, not because he wanted to be caught, but because he never considered how technology designed for convenience might disrupt carefully maintained compartmentalization. This recognition, that digital tools reflect and magnify our pre-existing traits rather than fundamentally changing human nature, has influenced my approach to technology in my rebuilt life. I use digital tools mindfully, with clear boundaries and privacy considerations, neither rejecting their benefits due to negative associations, nor implementing them without conscious assessment of their potential impacts. Betrayal reveals capabilities, not anomalies. In the early aftermath of discovery, I struggled to reconcile the Ryan I thought I knew with the person capable of sustained deception. I wanted to believe his betrayal represented a temporary aberration rather than a fundamental character revelation. Through therapy and painful reflection, I've come to understand that actions under pressure or opportunity don't create character, but reveal existing capabilities. Ryan's ability to compartmentalize so effectively, to maintain parallel relationships without apparent conflict, to lie consistently without visible distress. These weren't new traits developed for the affair, but existing tendencies amplified by circumstances and choices. This insight hasn't made me cynical about human nature, but it has made me more attentive to patterns rather than isolated actions, to capabilities demonstrated across contexts rather than promises made in optimal conditions. Healing happens through integration, not denial. My initial impulse after discovery was to quarantine the betrayal experience, to isolate it as an unfortunate chapter unrelated to my core identity or future relationships. This approach proved unsustainable, as the lessons learned through betrayal continuously influenced my perceptions and choices, whether I acknowledged them or not. Genuine healing began when I recognized that sustainable recovery required integration rather than compartmentalization, incorporating the betrayal experience into my understanding without allowing it to dominate my identity. Not defining myself primarily as someone who was cheated on, but acknowledging how that experience had shaped my perspective on trust, vulnerability, and resilience. This integrated approach has allowed me to build new relationships without either projecting past betrayal onto present connections or pretending previous experiences don't inform current boundaries and expectations. 18 months after discovery, I began dating again, cautiously at first, with the heightened awareness that comes from profound betrayal, but gradually with increasing openness to genuine connection. The relationship that developed with Michael, a landscape architect I met through a community garden project, progressed naturally without either reckless vulnerability or paranoid protection. "I've been through a significant betrayal," I told him on our third date, believing in transparency about experiences that shaped my approach to relationships. "It's changed how I understand trust and communication, not in ways that make connection impossible, but in ways that make me more intentional about boundaries and expectations." His response, thoughtful acknowledgement without either dismissive reassurance or dramatic promises, reflected the kind of authentic engagement I now recognized as essential to healthy relationships. Not performance designed to achieve a specific outcome, but genuine presence with appropriate recognition of both connection and autonomy. Our relationship has developed gradually over the past year, building on consistent demonstrations of integrity rather than assumed trustworthiness. When he says he'll call, he calls. When plans change, he communicates directly. When difficult topics arise, he engages rather than deflects. These aren't extraordinary measures, but basic considerations that I now recognize as fundamental rather than optional. We've recently begun discussing cohabitation, a step I approach with both openness and clear-eyed assessment rather than romantic abstraction. The apartment we're considering has sufficient space for both togetherness and necessary independence, reflecting my deeper understanding of how healthy relationships balance connection with appropriate boundaries. There will be no virtual assistants in our shared home, not because I've rejected technology entirely, but because I've become more discriminating about which conveniences justify potential privacy compromises. This choice isn't driven by lingering trauma, but by informed evaluation of benefits versus risks, convenience versus vulnerability. 2 years after that morning notification delivered unwanted but necessary truth, I recognized that the path from betrayal to transformation wasn't a simple journey from pain to healing, but a complex integration of difficult experience into expanded understanding. Not recovery that erases what happened, but resilience that incorporates painful knowledge into more conscious living. The virtual assistant that captured Ryan's betrayal ultimately delivered a message beyond the immediate evidence of infidelity. It revealed the fundamental insecurity of relationships built on assumption rather than awareness, the limitation of trust that lacks appropriate boundaries, and the possibility of rebuilding not despite devastating knowledge, but because of the clarity it eventually provides. For those navigating similar discoveries, whether through technology, chance encounter, or direct confession, I offer this hard-won wisdom. The pain you're experiencing is real and valid. The disorientation when trust is violated is not weakness but natural response to fundamental breach. The questioning of your own judgment is not paranoia, but necessary recalibration after significant misperception. But beyond these difficult realities lies potential transformation, not a return to who you were before betrayal, but evolution into someone with deeper understanding of human complexity, more conscious approach to trust, greater appreciation for authentic connection, precisely because you've experienced its counterfeit. This transformation doesn't happen easily or quickly. It emerges through consistent small choices to remain engaged with difficult truths rather than retreating into comfortable illusion. It develops through balancing appropriate skepticism with continued openness to genuine connection. It manifests in relationships characterized by conscious trust rather than naive assumption. The virtual assistant that captured my husband's betrayal ultimately reset more than just our marriage. It initiated a profound recalibration of my understanding of trust, authenticity, and resilience. A reset that, while painful beyond measure, eventually enabled construction of a life more genuinely aligned with reality than what existed before that fateful notification. And perhaps that's the paradoxical gift hidden within devastating discovery, the opportunity to build something authentic from the ruins of comfortable illusion, something sustainable in its acknowledgement of human complexity, something resilient precisely because it incorporates rather than denies the possibility of betrayal. Not a story of simple recovery, but of complex transformation. Not a return to innocent trust, but evolution toward conscious connection. Not erasure of painful knowledge, but integration of difficult truth into more authentic living. If you found value in this account of betrayal and transformation, please consider sharing it with others navigating similar discoveries. Your comments about related experiences or questions about healing after betrayal are welcome. This community has become a vital source of support for many walking parallel paths. And if you're currently in the raw stages of discovery, please know that while the pain you're experiencing is real and valid, it need not define your entire future. Beyond the disorientation of betrayal lies the possibility of rebuilding, not despite difficult knowledge, but because of the clarity it eventually provides. Thank you for listening to my story.